Alright guys, here's the thing about Cyberpunk 2077. I hold it in very high regard. In fact, I think it's downright amazing. Why? Ultimately, I just find it immensely fun. I think it does a lot of things exceptionally well, and I want to talk about those things later, but at the end of the day, I have a good time playing it. The amount of vitriol still surrounding this game is pretty crazy to me. I mean, I'll be the first to admit that the launch of Cyberpunk remains a hard saga to forget. It is in recent memory, of course, but more than that, people don't want to forget. And they shouldn't either, because what was given at the time of release should not be tolerated, particularly for previous gen consoles. I'm sure none of this stuff needs to be repeated. Honestly, I am sick to death of talking about it, but it feels nigh on unavoidable whenever the game is brought up, like its infamy is basically a meme at this point. It's a sad state of affairs that things have come to be this way. I feel very fortunate to have avoided all the promotional BS in the lead up to its release, with exception to the Keanu reveal. Still, my first playthrough was riddled with bugs and shit, but nothing game-breaking, no crashes, playing on the PC. There just wasn't anything that caused me any undue trouble. And so I was able to experience the game with nothing overly offensive performance-wise, and, perhaps more importantly, moderate expectations. It brought me tremendous joy. I love this game, and I will always be an advocate of its quality. I believe it deserves that much. The response I got from the Cyberpunk video I posted a few weeks back was quite eye-opening for me. There were some strong, well-articulated opinions, which I always appreciate, but it also attracted some seriously unhinged individuals, and it got me thinking about video game discourse and the, I guess, sense of betrayal that Cyberpunk and CDPR left upon people. I don't know if it was just a couple weirdos or whatever, but this shit runs deep for some, and more than anything, that is a real shame, because I do genuinely think there is a great game here, but as people still remember the whole fiasco with its launch, it feels like perception of it will forever be tainted. Eventually I unlisted that video because I wasn't too happy with how it was presented. This video will largely be of a similar vein to the previous one. I mean, my views of the game have certainly not changed since then, but I want to deliver something like a real talk version. A lot of this will be the same as before, but with some slight differences here and there. Heads up, there will be spoilers in this video. Whenever I play Cyberpunk, my mind always comes back to this idea of open-world Deus Ex. It's a video game franchise I adore, and Cyberpunk takes clear inspiration from it. I feel like CD Projekt Red set out to create a game that matched or at least attempted to replicate the kind of sophisticated level design and freedom found in Deus Ex, all while operating under this massive open world. I'm certain there would have been a commitment to things like storytelling, engaging side quests, memorable characters, etc., all features where The Witcher 3 was so well received. And so what we get in Cyberpunk is something akin to the love child of The Witcher 3 and Deus Ex, at least that's how it feels to me anyway. Above all else, it is a CDPR game. They are very good at what they do, but this is the first time they are creating a huge open-world cityscape on this level. So we have Night City. It's gorgeous aesthetically and impressive in scale, scope, verticality, level of detail, etc. But there seems to be this notion that the entire place is dead. You can't really interact with anyone outside of the quest NPCs, you can't enter every building, and so on and so forth. There is truth to this, but I would not call the place completely devoid of life. Things are happening, they're just not explicit, they have to be found. Most of these things are insignificant, but there are some interesting occurrences if you happen to stumble upon them. As you go deeper into the game, you soon discover that there is a bigger picture on offer as well. I mentioned the NCPD scanner hustles in the previous video, how each one contains a minor backstory and environmental storytelling that matches it. What's really cool about this is that it's possible to piece together what happened by yourself. On top of that, a lot of them are connected to each other, and some are even connected to fixer gigs. You know, the developers could have just left these as random encounters with no rhyme or reason to them, but they didn't, and there is something to be gained if you take the time to read through the shards. Look, it's not like every single one has this mind-blowing revelation or whatever, but there are links between them, and that attention to detail is something I really enjoy. This absolutely contributes to the world building. There's a lot of hidden stuff going on within Night City, and these are just one of many avenues for understanding. Arguably the most substantial avenue, though, are the gigs, as they act as the backdrop to life in Night City, providing insight on its inner machinations and life as a mercenary. Like the scanner hustles, they have contained stories within them, but they're a lot more explicit in their presentation, at least on a surface level anyway. More often than not, there are hidden elements to these gigs that require a bit more exploration to uncover, digging through emails, finding hidden footage and whatnot. It feels great to discover these things as they flesh out these stories even more. I personally think the gigs don't get nearly as much credit as they deserve for the reasons I just mentioned, but also because I have so much fun completing them. This is where I go back, once again, to this idea of open world Deus Ex. Gigs take place in areas and buildings that contain excellent level design and a lot of options for the player to utilize. Night City is meticulous in its detail, every area handcrafted to facilitate gameplay in multiple ways, and the gigs are where it's most apparent. Let's take a look at this one gig named Fifth Column. Your objective here is to infiltrate this building and gain access to this terminal. So let's see, I can use hacking to distract this one guard, or temporarily blind him and immediately go upstairs to the required area. Or I can speak to this fella, who initially prevents you from going to the second floor, but if you sent Jackie's body to his mother and participated in the offrender, then he recognizes you and you can have a drink with him, giving you access to the upstairs area. I suppose it's possible to massacre everyone as well if you so choose, but I've never tried that personally. Someone in the previous video pointed out that you can complete this gig peacefully as Street Kid V due to your connections to Padre and Haywood, and that is really cool, but again, I cannot confirm that personally. But this is my favorite method, running to the back of the building, taking out this one goon at the top, and using my Cyberware double jump upgrade to immediately access the room and the terminal. This is what Cyberpunk is all about and where it shines brightest to me. The many options you have at your disposal, the level design that facilitates it, and the freedom you have to complete objectives. Almost every single mission is set up like this, and there are so many creative opportunities as a result, increasing replayability and satisfaction. When you start combining these gameplay elements together, hacking, level design, stealth, traversal, finding your own solution, and more, Cyberpunk becomes incredibly rewarding to play. Ultimately, this all leads back to Night City and its quality. The city itself may not be the most interactive in a video game overall, but what it does contain is pockets of brilliance where tremendous fun can be had. I really appreciate that there isn't one defined style of play that you have to stick to, or is clearly the best option. You are given some freedom in that regard. So, for example, I've never been too fond of the all guns blazing approach. Something I absolutely adore in video games is stealth. It's why I'm such a big fan of titles like Ghost of Tsushima, The Last of Us, Deus Ex, and in Cyberpunk, stealth is what I immediately default to for almost every single mission. It's how I play the game, and is just one of several options you can take. The skill trees are extensive and cater to multiple playstyles. The customization options are vast with cyberware and various other upgrades, and most importantly, the game allows for consistency of effectiveness no matter what build you go, which facilitates and encourages experimentation. I just love that Night City has been designed in a way that allows for these many options. Sometimes I like to challenge myself by completing gigs without killing anyone, or only using hacking, or going in with my katana and slicing everyone to bits. It's really fun to see what I can accomplish. Let's talk about some of these aspects. Hacking is there to supplement your playstyle no matter what build you go, and I love it because of that. It's integrated seamlessly and I use it at every opportunity. No matter where you are in the world, there is always a massive amount of stuff you can potentially hack in the environment, whether it be people or electronics, and it allows for a lot of creative freedom. The level design in this game is one of my favorite things about it, not just the exteriors but the interiors as well. A little exploration goes a long way and you're almost guaranteed to find alternate pathways or hidden areas. This is what I mean when I say that every location has been handcrafted. Most of the time there are several pathways within the building itself, and it feels good to discover them. Some of the cyberware upgrades are interesting, especially the arm weapons like the mantis blades and whatnot, but to me the absolute best upgrades are the ones to your legs, particularly the double jump. This is a complete game changer. All of a sudden I can reach heights and perform stunts I was never able to before. Not only is it extremely fun to use, but it also opens up even more pathways, and that feels great. I do think these jumping upgrades have the potential to trivialize certain missions, but you still have to figure out how to do that by yourself, and the feeling of being rewarded is never diminished as a result. Stealth in Cyberpunk is incredibly fun to me, mainly due to the combination of various gameplay elements as I stated previously, furthering my stealthy endeavors. In fact, there are very few titles that I have more fun playing with this setup, even those where stealth is the primary focus of the game. There's also extra incentive for doing things stealthily. Sometimes you will get more rewards for completing missions without alerting anyone. NPCs will often compliment you if you handle things this way as well. This idea of pockets of brilliance is something applicable to the entire game, really. It has its ups and downs, just like every title. Some of it still feels half-baked. I mean, vehicles still do that thing where they appear to be rendering in the distance, but then disappear as soon as you get a little close to them. And vehicles still look like 2D postage stamps if you zoom in on them from a distance. I get it, rendering, level of detail, etc. And you know, these things do not bring the game down for me in any big way, but there is something rather off-putting about shit like this. Driving around the city may not be the most immersive thing ever, for some anyway, I personally enjoy it, but what about those first-person interactive dialogue scenes? These are some of the most captivating moments the game has to offer, with the scene at Clouds being one of the standout examples for me, although there are countless other examples similar to this. It is powerful, on a deeply personal level, and the first-person perspective makes that possible. Since we're on this subject, I personally think there is nothing wrong with the first-person camera here. I just don't feel it detracts from the game's quality in any way. Everyone has their preferences. Fair enough. Maybe it's different on consoles, I don't know. If you suffer from motion sickness with the first-person perspective, that sucks. But I don't think the developers should compromise on their vision of the game, and the game itself should not be compromised in service of those incredibly immersive first-person moments. I can't think of any other game that has got as much shit as this one for its choice of perspective. It's honestly baffling to me. I have played many first-person shooters in my time, on PC and console, so I guess I'm just used to it. Perhaps there could have been a system where the first-person perspective alternates with a third-person camera, but I don't really want to comment on the should have, would have, or could have. With Cyberpunk, some people are so fixated on lines of thought that include stuff like wasted potential, or missed opportunities for X, Y, and Z features that may or may not work in the game's world, and they are seemingly unable to move on from that. I don't know, I feel like if you're constantly thinking that way, then nothing will ever be good enough. I suppose CDPR are primarily to blame for that mindset, but it's still a shame. And I'm not trying to say that there isn't room for improvement or the game is beyond reproach or anything like that, of course not. I just don't think it's all that bad, especially today. Even for someone like me whose first playthrough was relatively stable, this game was a complete mess when it first came out, there's just no denying that, but it's been some time since then, and as of now, it is in the best state I have ever seen it. The 1.5 patch was the biggest overhaul to the game and its systems thus far. It brought with it some very positive changes. There's greater variety and frequency in the different weather effects, which I think helps make Night City feel a bit more authentic. It was very noticeable for me on this playthrough. The map is nowhere near as cluttered as before, driving feels better, and the minimap zooms out a bit whilst driving as well. One of the best changes they made is that gigs are now given to you in a progressive manner from their respective fixers. You complete one set of gigs, and more become available immediately after with a text message from the fixer confirming as much. This feels way more natural, and really is how it should have been from the start. There were also some changes to the skill trees. They almost completely revamped the stealth tree, so much so that they felt the need to rename it to ninjutsu. Some of the more bullshit perks have been removed, thankfully. I remember there was one that made it so enemies were unable to detect you underwater. I mean, what a pointless upgrade that was. Throwing knives have been reworked as well. You can actually retrieve your knives after throwing them now. Why this wasn't the case from the start is something I will never understand, but I'm glad they made this change. I got some good use out of them on this playthrough, and with the juggler perk I never ran out. You now have a reset perk points option in the menu screen, which is nowhere near as expensive or cumbersome as before. Previously it cost €100,000 to respec, which was just a ridiculous price point in my opinion. They also added some other stuff like purchasable apartments in-game, which is cool, but I don't care for it personally, and you can change your character's appearance beyond the character creation screen via mirrors. Something else I don't care for is the wanted system, because I so rarely find myself wanted. Sure, the system itself is questionable, but it has never got in my way or in the inverse brought me joy of any kind, so I don't have much to say on it. I think the idea of the lore having more of an impact on gameplay and such sounds cool, but it would have to be done with surgical precision, because if it ever reached a point where the police are intrusive to gameplay, then I'd rather not have them in the game at all. It's a minor complaint I had with Red Dead Redemption 2 if you watched my video on that game. On that note, I do have quite a few complaints with this game. First and foremost, I hate that the crouch button is mapped to the same key as the skip dialogue option. There is nothing more annoying than accidentally skipping dialogue just because you don't want to be in a crouched position. I also hate it when dialogue from one source overlaps with another. This was a much bigger issue when the game first came out. I go out of my way to avoid it now, but it did happen occasionally still. One of the biggest points of criticism aimed at this game is how poorly the enemy AI behaves. Personally, I always found it was more of a consistency issue rather than it being straight up bad, and whilst things are definitely better now, I did notice a few moments where the AI was a bit too unpredictable for my liking. The one big exception to this being the cyber psychos. I mean, these guys are just pathetic. I can run up to almost every single one and mindlessly slash at them with my katana, and they just sit there, taking it until they're dead. It's a shame because a lot of these situations are genuinely interesting, with some great lead up in the environment to them, like this is one of my favorites, but there is very little satisfaction gained from the actual fights. It's weird because the encounter with Oda is one of my favorite moments in the game. Fighting him with a katana feels amazing, and I wish the rest of the cyber psychos were of a similar quality. The looting aspect of the game was an interesting choice by CDPR. I'm not entirely sure what they were going for with this system, but it results in a dynamic where you're kind of just hoping some decent gear drops. They have reduced the amount of lootable items throughout the adventure, thankfully. I mean, it was ridiculous at the game's launch, and the inventory system was a total mess. Things are better, but that dynamic still remains. It's part of what makes going for a stealth build a bit awkward at the start. I'm practically praying that a decent handgun and a silencer comes my way eventually, because otherwise you can't reliably kill enemies with one shot, and that doesn't feel good. Not to mention you have to place some points into the handgun and stealth trees if you want that guaranteed kill. Now, I personally believe that Cyberpunk has something of a scaling issue. This game's challenge drops off a cliff in its later half, with exception to the final mission. Certain combinations of perk points can be utterly devastating, and don't get me wrong, it's fun, but after a certain point it feels like I have to actively limit myself in order to maintain the game's challenge. Putting too many points into the blade tree may as well turn your katana into a fucking lightsaber. Nothing really stands a chance afterwards. This game is rather easy to break. Firearms get completely out of control in its second half, especially if you spend the time upgrading and crafting them. You can craft some absolutely disgusting weapons if that's the route you choose to take. Again, it feels good getting better gear, but things get silly in the endgame. I found the gunplay a bit janky when I first played the game, but by this point I'm totally used to it, so I have no issues in that regard. I also gotta say that armor in this game looks fucking ridiculous. It's practically an inevitability that you will look like a complete dumbass at some point, especially if you prioritize the highest armor pieces. It's all style over substance for me. Alright, let's talk about some other stuff. One of the best things about The Witcher 3 was its side quests. I found the vast majority of them very compelling, and the fact that you could import your save file from The Witcher 2 and have that influence quests gave it something a little extra, I feel. Personally, I think the side quests in Cyberpunk don't quite match the overall quality of side quests found in The Witcher, but there are a few outstanding examples, and Dream On is one of my favorite quests in all of gaming. Now, when I say outstanding side quests, what I'm really referring to are the 4 major quest chains relating to specific characters, the romance options in the game: River, Judy, Panam, and Kerry. These quests provide an extremely intimate look at each of these characters. All of them are emotionally charged, and there is real development within them as well, although there is quite a bit of variance in how much we get from each one. The biggest point of commonality between these characters is that they are all vulnerable and suffering in their own way. The arrival of V in their lives marks the beginning of serious change, and seeing firsthand how much of a difference we make makes these questlines memorable. Judy and Panam's journeys are easily the best of the 4, so let's talk about them first. Judy is my second favorite character in this game. I absolutely love her. Her questline is a pretty heavy one as she loses her best friend and attempts to do some good for those around her, particularly those in her field. The sex work industry is put into focus here, and Judy's questline pulls no punches in its graphic depiction of it. It's likely she has seen the worst of the worst, but she still maintains a certain purity, and the idea of doing nothing doesn't sit right with her. With the help of V, she brings a new order to Clouds, making the dollhouse independent from the Tiger Claws, and this is a big deal for Judy. It marks a turning point for her fellow workers, genuine change that she had a massive hand in bringing about, even if it is rather short-lived. And when all is said and done, she invites V to Laguna Bend to explore the underwater ruins of her hometown. This is one of my favorite quests in the game. It's an emotional moment for Judy, one that has taken her years to fully realize, and sharing this experience is her way of opening up to V and showing how grateful she is for everything V has done. All the shit that Judy goes through in her questline places an immense emotional toll on her. Part of the reason why I love playing as the female V is for the scene at the end of this quest. I can't show it on YouTube obviously, but I just find it to be an incredibly beautiful, emotional climax to their journey together. It's different to the scenes with River, Panam, and Kerry in that I feel the actual act itself is much more intimate and meaningful for the two involved. When we first meet Panam Palmer, she has left her clan, the Aldecaldos, and is looking to find work as a mercenary in Night City, which brings her into contact with V. Initially, she is very standoffish and doesn't really want to have anything to do with us, but she ultimately accepts the need to collaborate in the name of mutual self-interest. Panam shows many endearing qualities during your quest with her. She is fiercely independent and very intelligent, possessing a sharp, intuitive mind, as seen when she repeatedly devises plans to further her goals. A prime example is when she looks to secure Sol from the Wrath and Shiv. The way she analyzes their base, identifying its weak points and reaching logical conclusions as to its setup, is impressive. She's also a total badass. One of my favorite moments with Panam is when you fail to take down the AV, she gets out the car and shoots the thing with an RPG. I love that. I think it sums up her character perfectly, but it's also made very clear that she cares deeply about her clan. I believe her headstrong attitude and boisterousness is something of a defense mechanism for her. But her biggest problem, and the reason she so often clashes with Sol, is because her methods are inherently dangerous, despite having the best interests of the Aldecaldos at heart. I can totally understand why Sol sees her as something of a liability. Her plans put lives at risk. At this point, Panam's life has reached a crossroads. You pull off some seriously ambitious stuff together, and the questline's resolution is tremendously satisfying. Seeing Sol recognize everything she has done, putting the clan above herself on multiple occasions, and Panam's reaction to it is genuinely heartwarming. Panam's journey is as much about the Aldecaldos as it is about her and V, which is what makes it the most distinct of the four romance options. Life as a nomad is a striking contrast to the hustle and bustle, the hostility and danger of Night City. It's the little moments with Panam and the clan, sitting around a campfire, drinking and telling stories, that gives this questline a certain charm. The community and family factor is emphasized massively here, making for some of the more memorable moments in the game. Next up we have River and Kerry. Now, in isolation, I think these questlines are rather good. River is a classic case of an idealistic cop trying to do what's right in a city that is morally corrupt from top to bottom. The quest where you attempt to track down his missing nephew Randy offers some of the heaviest subject matter that Cyberpunk has to offer. I do think this game does a really good job at making characters and situations feel natural. It's one of those things that CD Projekt Red excel at. The way this entire situation plays out with all the characters involved, River, V, Joss, etc., feels genuine, and that is difficult to achieve in a video game. I gotta say, I do find it fun playing detective, piecing together clues and ascertaining Randy's location. There are some fun little details here that I imagine most people will likely miss. If you visited Edgeware Farm before this quest, then V will immediately recognize it in the brain dance and suggest to go there. If you haven't been there and somehow managed to mess up the brain dance sequence, then you'll be given a choice of 2 farms to explore, and if you choose the wrong one, then Randy will die by the time you get to the other. His final quest has another heavy moment where River explains how his parents died. It's a clear indication of how highly he thinks of V. It's also here where River confesses he is into you, if you're playing the female V, which is what I did for this playthrough. And I don't mind this pursuit, but I prefer romancing Judy so much more, so I always turn him down the morning after. Sorry, River. I also have to bring up this cursed photo that Josh sends you after saving Randy. I mean, what the fuck is this? I can't take it seriously. Kerry Eurodyne's questline is all about battling his own insecurities and revitalizing his sense of purpose in life. It's suggested that he attempted suicide, and whilst he does brush this off as a promo strategy, his words here seem to suggest something more.
The very gun I tried to shoot Johnny with when he broke into my house.
Meaning you tried to shoot me?
Yeah. And earlier... And never mind.
If you search his house, there's a bunch of articles relating to his career, including his time in Samurai, being in Johnny Silverhand's shadow, and more. He seems obsessed with his own self-image, to the point where it consumes his thoughts. It's an exploration of the uglier side of fame, which we're not often exposed to. For some, it does become too much to bear, and Kerry appears to be on the precipice. It is rather touching to see him very slowly be honest with not just V, but also himself as his questline proceeds. I think there is a gentle soul beneath his bad boy rocker exterior. Kerry's quests are really fun, especially the Samurai gig, which contains the single greatest dialogue option from any game ever. But beyond that, and kind of similar to Pan Am, his story is as much about his relationship with Johnny Silverhand as it is with V, which is something that extends to Rogue's series of quests as well. It's clear that Johnny was hugely significant for those close to him, and I like that we get to clear up some unfinished business. The impact we have on all of these characters is best summed up by Kerry himself.
Been thinking about that Us Cracks fiasco lately. About how you helped me. A lot. You shake things up, V. Before you came along, I was stuck in the mud.
And now?
Got me thinking about a new song. A new album, even. A real fucking thrasher with a new soul. Like everything from now on.
By the end of it all, he is given a new lease on life. Now, as I said before, River and Kerry's romances are good in isolation, but when compared to Judy and Pan Am's, they're just not quite as fleshed out, especially River's. I think there is a natural progression in how his feelings build for V, due to the impact that V has on him and his family's life, but you only have 3 quests together. They're long and involved, but they cannot hope to match the development and satisfaction found in Judy and Pan Am's questlines. Kerry's romance is a little bit better, but suffers from similar issues, especially when speaking comparatively. Either way, I do think this game has some extremely powerful character moments, no doubt helped by excellent writing and voice acting. It does kind of remind me of Arthur from Red Dead 2 in that eventually, you start caring for these characters, and that is a mighty achievement. With that said, I do find it a bit disappointing that the male romance options are not as involved as the female ones, but their quests are fun and there are some great moments, as I mentioned. Now, something I absolutely adore about Cyberpunk is its ability to deliver a sense of atmosphere. Subject matter plays a huge part, of course, but it's mainly down to the presentation and audio that define those intense moments. Cyberpunk is a dark, gritty game, and a lot of effort has been placed into emphasizing that. It starts as soon as you boot the game up with this title screen and the music that plays alongside it, setting the tone for the rest of the adventure. I also just love the contrast between that and this bright and colorful metropolis. There are so many examples I can think of where the intensity of the atmosphere is through the roof and I find myself completely immersed in what's happening. If I had to choose a quest that personified that idea more than any other, I would choose Dream On, my favorite quest in the game. Essentially what's happening here is that Elizabeth and Jefferson Perales are being brainwashed by an unknown entity. They're having false memories implanted within them, altering their personalities in a big way. This is exactly the kind of crazy dystopian shit you expect to find in dark sci-fi, and I find it spellbinding. There's also some great attention to detail in their apartment as well. On his personal computer, Jefferson's chief advisor informs him that he has been acting unpredictable lately. They also have a disagreement where he asks Jeff why someone is still working with them, as he thought they let her go, but Jeff completely denies he ever suggested it. Then if you search Elizabeth's computer, the same advisor asks her why Jeff changed his mind about firing the woman, as if he pulled a complete 360 in the space of 2 days. In their bedroom, when you bring up their wedding photo, Elizabeth says that she wanted blue roses, but in the picture they're clearly red. That sounds rather similar to another piece of fiction, where red reveals the truth and blue maintains the illusion. Anyway, speaking to Elizabeth in the ramen shop is when the magnitude of the situation really comes to the fore. This is one of my favorite moments in the entire game. Everything about this part is executed so brilliantly. The eerie music and intensity of the subject matter creates a truly disturbing atmosphere.
I don't know who, how, or why, but they're changing us. That concealed room in our apartment,
What about it?
I'm sure I'd seen it before, but must have somehow forgotten. I find that terrifying.
I found this incredibly chilling on my first playthrough, and for this game to have that effect on me is something I cannot help but admire. At the very end of it, you can either tell Jefferson he is being manipulated, or you can hide the truth from him as Elizabeth asks you to, so that his ignorance protects him. That is a difficult moral decision, but the phone call you get just before speaking to him always has me lean towards telling him. It's like, well shit, now I'm definitely gonna tell him. I don't know who this Mr. Blue Eyes guy is. He shows up in the Sun ending, but there is little to no information on him. Since he's monitoring our interaction with Jefferson, I can only assume he is connected to it in some fashion. But on the subject of decision making, now, in the previous video I stated that decisions in this game are subtle and character focused as opposed to world focused, which I think is true. There are varying degrees of consequence to the decisions you make, but they're kind of difficult to notice, and there aren't any that have a major impact on the world at large. The decisions and dialogue options you choose, and even how you play certain missions, as in stealthy or all guns blazing, more often than not affect the kind of response you will get from characters, and I think it is cool that there are multiple responses, despite it not really having any consequence in the grand scheme of things. I know some people find that disappointing, and that's fair enough. It doesn't really bother me in a big way, but I can understand people's frustrations. I personally enjoy the little things in this game, like having the ability to interrupt characters, or letting the dialogue options run out of time and keeping my mouth shut. I like that these are options you can take occasionally. It makes the experience feel a bit more personal, I feel. To touch on some of the other side quests real quick, the whole thing with Joshua, I mean, it's pretty intense when you have to nail him to the cross yourself. It is a rather bizarre situation, but I've never really found this quest amazingly compelling or whatever. And that also applies to the Delamain set of quests. In fact, some of these are straight up tedious, although I think the choice you have to make in the final mission is interesting to think about. There are all sorts of colourful characters in this game, and one of the more memorable ones is this guy, Ozob Bozo. I mean, just look at him. I think he is criminally underutilized. You only encounter him for one quest and one fist fight. Kinda wish there was more. I accidentally killed him on this playthrough. You can punch the grenade lodged in his face and the rest plays out as you'd expect. I had no idea this was possible. Alright, let's move on to the story. Cyberpunk's main narrative has a lot of interesting elements about it, and the biggest one is Johnny Silverhand. But before we get to that, I want to touch on a few areas first. I too was one of those people who was disappointed when I saw that the life paths you choose at the beginning of the game don't really mean anything in the grand scheme of things. There absolutely are differences between them. I mean, besides the obvious stuff like the unique prologues you get and the additional side quests for each one, but the real differences come in the form of dialogue options. Whatever life path you choose gives your character additional perspective and, at times, an advantage or disadvantage in particular conversations and situations. Corpo V is a completely different beast to Street Kid and Nomad V. They're nowhere near as naive, and are much more cynical. It definitely feels like they've been around the block, which makes perfect sense given that you start as an Arasaka agent in Night City. You're able to see through some of the underhanded dealings from corporations that Street Kid and Nomad V are unable to recognize, and a similar thing applies to all the life paths in their own way. Quite like the decision making, these differences are subtle, character focused, and take multiple playthroughs to really notice. Could they have done more with them? Probably yeah, but I've grown to appreciate them in recent times. But anyway, every life path converges after about 20 or so minutes of gameplay, where you and your buddy Jackie Wells are looking to make a name for yourselves. I know a lot of people wanted to actually play through this montage where they get up to all sorts of shit together, and I agree, it would have been nice. It certainly would have made his eventual death after the heist a bit more impactful. With that said though, Jackie just isn't the focus of this game. It's all about V's fate intertwining with Johnny Silverhand, so I can understand why they made this choice. And that's the main crux of Cyberpunk. Through a top-secret biochip developed by Arasaka, an engram of Johnny Silverhand is slowly overwriting V's consciousness, and this is something that shocked me when I first played the game. After I saw the Keanu reveal, I thought Johnny would be your partner in crime, taking up a similar role to Jackie Wells, but instead he's more like a traveling companion who's slowly killing you, by no fault of his own I should add. You can see, speak, and interact with Johnny, but this all happens in V's head. It will differ from person to person, of course, but I definitely think that Johnny has some degree of influence on the player's choices, particularly on their first playthrough. He's constantly chiming in on just about everything, whether you like it or not, and the relationship he has with the player is what I find so interesting. I do think there is a bit of a disconnect at the start of the game, right after you receive the news from Vic. Johnny makes it clear that he wants to kill V, but it's only after going to Tom's diner that he announces he does not wish to kill V, and instead thinks they should work together. If you're someone like me who does a bunch of side quests in between the main missions, Johnny just shows up and he and V banter like nothing is going on. It just feels a bit disjointed. But to go back to what I was talking about earlier, Johnny will either praise or reprimand you based on what decisions you make. Think about this subtle thumbs up of approval from Johnny in this scene right here.
Now, we part. Reconnaissance is required.
What are you doing? Don't let him off his leash.
You're a stranger in a strange land. Going with you.
True.
This is the kind of thing that is fed to you constantly. Positive reinforcement when you go along with his plans, and negative reinforcement when you defy him. Look, at the end of the day, this is a video game, and I certainly am not a psychologist, and as I said before, it differs from person to person, but you are with Johnny all the time, and I do think he rubs off on you, especially as you go deeper and deeper into the game. Johnny is a rocker boy arsehole, an egomaniac, a narcissist, and he never shies away from these things, it's just who he is. An ex-military man who harbors a deep hatred for megacorps, feeling that they slowly consume the land and take over people's lives. In his mind, he is fighting for freedom, for a better America that may one day belong to the people. His music became an extension of his feelings, but we are reminded repeatedly that it never made him feel any better, so he thought to attack the Arasaka Corporation. It is a bit difficult to understand what exactly he is fighting for, and because he is so dead set in his ways, it makes it hard to relate to him. I get the feeling Johnny was just as confused as V when he woke up in their head, and watching their relationship unfold is entertaining. He does have this somber moment of introspection at the oil fields, and it is a great moment. I enjoy listening to him be honest with himself and V. He definitely has some influence on V as a character as well. One of the best examples I can think of is this part outside of Judy's apartment. In this footage, you can see me decline Johnny's request to smoke a cigarette, but if you've tracked down Anders Hellman before doing this quest, then in this scene V is already smoking. This is the kind of subtle change that I was talking about earlier. Beyond that though, there are a few times when you get to experience his memories firsthand, which allows for some understanding of what he has been through. Something I find really interesting about these sections is that whenever you describe them to people who are there, they remind you that you are seeing things from his perspective, and it's not a completely accurate representation of what happened. The memories are influenced by Johnny's perception of himself, and that is an intriguing angle to consider. I must say, the sections where you play as him are a good time. His gun is straight broken, it's really fun to use, and when the Rebel Path is blaring in the background, it's badass. The part where he takes control of your body, gets smashed, goes to a strip club, and ends up in a car crash just to get Rogue on your side, personifies his character. He's completely out of control, but there is method to his madness. But anyway, the plot then centers around V trying to find a way to cure his or her ailment. There are some pretty awesome moments along the way, one of my favorites being when you dive into cyberspace and go beyond the Black Wall to meet Alt Cunningham. I love the music and atmosphere here. They really put a lot of effort into the presentation of sections like this, and it pays off wonderfully. Pursuing Anders Hellman is fun, but it's what you get up to with Takamura that really stands out to me. These are some of the best missions and moments the game has to offer. There's plenty of action to be had, but my favorite part is the conversation you have with him atop the building site. This is where Takamura opens up to you a bit, revealing some of his past, whilst also dropping some sage-like wisdom. In fact, he regularly drops memorable quotes throughout the game.
Looking for justice? In Night City?
I seek revenge. Much more feasible here.
Wait. Think she's complicit in Saburo's murder?
I think we are all to blame. We allowed ourselves to be tricked.
Saying you got no dirt on your hands?
There are no clean hands, but it is important how they become dirty.
He questions V's motivations and tries to explain to V that there are two sides to every story. I really love the writing here. His perspective flies in the face of V's, and it makes for one of the more profound conversations in the game. Takamura is my favorite character by a long shot, and it's atop the building site that this was firmly established. Now this game has multiple endings, 5 if you include the suicide option, and there's a secret ending, which is really just a variation of the sun ending, so I don't count it on its own. There's actually a decent number of variations to each ending depending on what choices you make throughout your journey. I could sit here and give you my thoughts on each one, but we would be here all day. Something I will say though is that no matter what ending you choose, the final mission is extremely difficult if you go for a stealth build, because it's not an option in any of them and you're basically fucked. This is another reason why I appreciate the reset perk points option. I also do enjoy how in the devil ending, Saburo Arasaka overwrites Yorinobu's consciousness. That is such a power play. I suppose this explains why Saburo was overseeing the development of Johnny's biochip in the first place, to grant himself immortality, although I thought the biochip was one of a kind. Whatever. Probably the most satisfying ending is the Star, where you leave Night City with the Aldecaldos. I really dislike that Sol is killed on this mission though. I could see it coming from a mile away, but it still pisses me off. This is easily the most beautiful ending in the game. It's a genuinely nice conclusion, and watching V and Panam ride off into the night feels good. Now my only real problem with this story is that I find it to be a little on the short side. I read that CDPR intentionally made the game much shorter than The Witcher 3 because some people complained about that game's length. Well, here I am about to complain about this game's length, at least the main story. Look, you can't please everyone in life, trust me, I understand that being a YouTuber, but I do kinda wish there was more. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the graphics. The game looks amazing. I love the overall aesthetic, the bright colors, the character designs are great. I could go on, but I do think the audio deserves some attention. Cyberpunk's soundtrack is great stuff. Now when it comes to the radio music, CDPR brought in a bunch of different artists from all over the world to create some original tracks, and the result is an extremely varied selection of songs covering all sorts of genres. If I can be honest, the only ones I really like are Delicate Weapon, Kill the Messenger, and especially Resist and Disorder. These are songs that I actually listen to outside of playing the game, but the rest of the radio music I don't care for. For the actual score, it's mainly made up of ambient pieces that are dark as all hell, and I think they work wonderfully, but there are also a few other tracks that really step up the hype, particularly in combat sections, my favourite being Johnny Silverhand's theme, The Rebel Path. This is such a good piece of music. I also do enjoy V's theme, or the main menu theme. The songs played by Samurai are pretty good. I'm only really fond of Chippin' In and Never Fade Away personally, but I love Kerry Eurodyne's version of Chippin' In. It's another song I actively listen to outside of the game. I also love this jingle Kerry plays for you on his yacht. Okay, I think that should just about do it for this video. Cyberpunk 2077 is a game I've grown tremendously fond of since its release. I enjoyed my first playthrough, but nowadays the game is so much better, and I think even higher of it as a result. The numerous updates have done a lot of good for this title, especially the 1.5 patch. It sure as hell is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. There's still plenty of jank throughout the entire adventure, but likewise there is, and always has been, a lot of good to it as well. This game gets an awful lot of shit for all the hopes and dreams it dashed, but I don't think it's nearly as bad as some people like to make out. The overwhelming wave of negativity that it was met with spiraled completely out of control, and you will never convince me otherwise. I can't comment on the console version of the game because I have no experience with it. I'm speaking purely from a PC perspective here. I seriously hope CD Projekt Red learn a lot from this endeavor, because this game deserves better. All the people who contributed to it deserve better. Everyone who purchased it deserved better than what they initially got. I do think they should be given some credit for making the game more enjoyable. It is in the best state I have ever seen it. I wonder what the overall response to this game would have been if it was released as it is now. I guess there's no point speculating though. Cyberpunk's launch will follow it for the rest of time, and that is a shame, but I thoroughly enjoy the experience it offers. If I can be perfectly frank, I think this game is incredible. I just have too much fun with it to say otherwise. I gotta say, I'm really looking forward to the DLC, which I assume we will be getting at some point. I did read somewhere that they're only developing one DLC, and I gotta say that would be a bit disappointing, but it's better than nothing. And that's gonna be all from me, guys. Thank you for watching.